But our cover story tonight is about the ultimate danger, the Ukraine war going nuclear. This is not an idle threat, nor is it bravado by a maverick commander. This threat comes straight from Vladimir Putin. On Tuesday, he issued a clear and unambiguous ultimatum that Russia would use depleted uranium weapons on the battlefield. Now, why? Why would Putin do this? If you ask the NATO and the West, they will tell you that Putin wants to avenge the death of one of his best generals, Sergei Goryachev, the chief of staff of the 35th Combined Arms Army. He was reportedly killed by a Ukrainian missile strike during Kiev's counter-offensive in Zaporizhia. Now, his death is a major blow to the Kremlin. The West says that Putin will not allow this wound to Russia's military ego go unanswered, and the Russian army could use weapons with depleted uranium in Ukraine. Now, this marks a big turning point in the war, one that could make it far more dangerous. You see, depleted uranium is a dense byproduct of enriched uranium. It is less explosive and less dangerous, but it retains some radioactive properties. If it's ingested or inhaled, it could be a serious health hazard. If put into bullets and explosives, it can be used to penetrate armored vehicles. In any case, Western media reports say that this threat to use depleted uranium stems from the killing of the Russian general. Now, Moscow doesn't agree. Moscow says it's only returning the favor. You see, Ukraine too could get depleted uranium weapons soon. Look at these reports. The UK is planning to supply depleted uranium shells to Ukraine's armed forces. The US too is set to approve depleted uranium tank rounds for Ukraine. So clearly, Putin has more than one reason to be the first to use these weapons. Similarly, there are more than one reason why the risk of a nuclear tragedy is increasing. Here's reason number 2. The situation at the Zaporizhia nuclear plant in Ukraine is getting serious. Says who? Rafael Grossi, the nuclear chief at the United Nations. On Thursday, he visited the Moscow-occupied nuclear plant to assess the threat it faces after the destruction of the Kakhovka dam, which we spoke about last week. His assessment is this. 1. The plant faces a relatively dangerous situation due to the nearby flooding. 2. There could be a major accident at the facility if the dam, which formed a reservoir for the plant, is not fixed. In other words, the plant may be safer now, but the situation remains fragile. And reason number 3, and perhaps the most serious of the lot, is this entire talk about Russian nuclear weapons now being placed into Belarus and what could possibly happen with them. Look, nuclear threats, the moving around of nuclear weapons, this is dangerous. This is a scary escalation at the best of times. And when it's happening in the middle of an all-out shooting war, it makes the situation even more dangerous and even more fragile. And frankly, what's making this entire situation even more fragile is Ukraine's ongoing counter-offensive. It's picking pace every minute. This week, Ukraine says it liberated 4 villages in the country's southeast. This was the first yet modest victory in its counter-offensive. So which villages does Ukraine say it has liberated? Well, there's Blahodatne, there's Neskuchne, there's Makaruvka, and there's Storozheve. They are all located in the Donetsk region. Here's a map of the entire region. That's what Ukraine says it has made some gains. Now, what does Russia have to say about this? Well, quite interestingly, nothing at all. Moscow is yet to confirm the fall of any of these villages. Instead, it's speaking of repelling Ukraine assaults in the region. Look at this report. Moscow claims that it has repelled Ukrainian counteroffensives in the Donetsk and the Zaporizhia regions. How? By hitting targets with sea-launched high-precision missile strikes. Interestingly, Russia has also claimed its first kill by artificial intelligence. Reports say that its highly acclaimed S-350 Wityaz air defense system recently shot down a Ukrainian aircraft while operating in auto mode. Now, this would be an unprecedented and an extraordinary feat. An air defense system destroying an aircraft without any operator intervention. This would mark the first instance where a system operated completely automatically used artificial intelligence for combat. In another first, Putin has hit oligarchs with a $5.3 billion war tax. The proposed levy was outlined in a bill introduced on Tuesday, and under this bill, Russian businesses making profits of more than 1 billion rubles a year will have to pay a one-off tax up to 10% of their total gains. On the face of it, this move may seem arbitrary, but Russian media reports claim that the oligarchs themselves came up with the idea. Now, why did they do this? Because they realized they made gigantic profits during the course of this war, so it's a win-win deal for both sides. What do all of these developments tell you? That as Ukraine's counteroffensive gains strength, if it gains strength, so does Vladimir Putin's determination to counter this. Now, he's taking control of mercenary groups, he's planning to use depleted Uranian weapons, he's increasing the budget for this war, and he's unleashing AI to down aircraft. In a nutshell, he's going all out to ensure that Kiev's advances fail. The question is, will he succeed? Well, so far, he has been succeeding in at least maintaining the standoff and the stalemate, and he might continue to do that going forward. For more on how all of this is actually going, let's now talk to Charles Kupchan, who's the Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and former Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for European Affairs on the staff at the National Security Council in the Barack Obama administration. Thank you so much for joining us. Just wanted to get your sense of what's actually happening in Ukraine, especially with that counter-offensive. Many reports coming out on whether it's been successful or not and how successful it's been. What are you being able to pick up?
Well, I think it's way too early to make any judgments about how the offensive will go. This is an offensive operation that will likely run for months, maybe years. It's very difficult to say. But it's clear that in the various locations that the Ukrainians have tried to punch through Russian defenses, they have not yet made a great deal of progress. They are running into minefields. They are running into Russian defenses that are multiple layers, trenches, tank traps, more trenches, all kinds of concrete fortifications. And one problem that an advancing army faces, and the Ukrainians are facing this, is the offensive requires them to come out from their own defensive positions. It's easier to hit them when they're out in the open, when they're massing for an armored breakthrough. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've begun to see fairly substantial Ukrainian casualties.
We're just trying to look at the possible black swan events that could come into this and make a change one way or the other. We've been hearing all that discussion about what could happen on the nuclear front with depleted uranium or, Belarus and what's happening out of there, possible escalation. We've also been hearing possibly about what's happening with the Wagner group, with Prigozhin, with his relationship with the Russian leadership. What do you think could happen to make a dramatic change one way or the other?
I haven't yet seen any sign that Putin is in trouble, that is to say, could face a real domestic threat to his regime. Public support for the war continues to run high. As far as we know, the security apparatus, the key decision makers around Putin are standing by him, in part because he successfully built a patronage system. Their livelihood, their power, their influence all stems from Vladimir Putin, and that makes it hard for them to go anywhere. So that I would say that the real black swans in my mind are China. Is China going to start arming Russia, which in my mind is a real possibility if Russia begins to lose and if Ukraine looks like it is posing a real prospect of taking back all of its territory. Escalation is also out there. There's talk the last few days about Putin moving nuclear weapons to Belarus. That hasn't been confirmed, but who knows where this war could go. We've seen dangerous moments. We've seen missiles land in Poland. We've seen Russian fighters force down a U.S. drone. We've seen drones attack the Kremlin. This is a war that has the potential for escalation.
All right, Mr. Kripchen, thank you so much for joining us with that. Thank you.